For all of you conspiracy people who think that people were giving signals, you know who that man was? His name's Frank Turek. He's an apologist for the Christian faith. When I got to the hospital, there was Frank in hospital scrubs because his clothes were covered in blood because he was giving him CPR all the way to the hospital. Just get off the stupid internet and stop with it. And he wasn't assassinated by Israel. Enough is enough. We're mourning. I lost my friend. I was over in Korea.
I think Charlie was definitely on the brink of changing some of his perspectives. And I can tell you factually, Charlie was praying the rosary. Charlie was going to Mass. One of my last conversations with Charlie was me joking with him saying, just make the last step, okay? You are, I said specifically, you're too smart to be a Protestant. Just take the last step, Charlie. He says, haha, speaking about Mary. And typically, when those steps start taking place, you stop referring to yourself, as I did, as a Judeo-Christian.
Just when the nation was still reeling from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, an explosive claim landed that forced a new argument into the public square. On her podcast, Candace Owens said Charlie was praying the rosary, attending Mass, and was on the verge of becoming Catholic. It is the kind of assertion that changes the frame of a story overnight. Because if true, it would mark a dramatic spiritual turn in the life of one of the conservative movement's most recognizable figures. It is also the kind of claim that, made at this moment of grief, slices into public feeling like a blade, and invites questions about evidence, motive, and the line between private faith and public narrative. To understand why the claim landed so hard, we have to go back and look at the relationships that made the statement carry weight.
I don't understand, the divinity of him tweeting that.
I'm living in that 21st century. There's some meaning to it.
Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk were not casual acquaintances. For years they debated, traveled, campaign-style attacked and defended, and moved through the same circles. Candace has said in the past that Charlie indirectly led her to her husband and that they brainstormed together when Charlie was pursuing Erica. That kind of personal history matters because it means Candace's words are not coming from a stranger or a media baiter. They are coming from someone who claims intimacy, someone who says she spoke with Charlie in private and saw him changing. So when she speaks of rosary beads and Mass attendance, listeners hear it as more than rumor, they hear it as testimony. Her claim was blunt and memorable. Charlie was praying the rosary. Charlie was going to Mass, she told her audience. She even framed it with a private joke. Just make the last step. Okay, you're too smart to be a Protestant. Just take the last step, Charlie. The line is cinematic in its provocation. A close friend, in the wake of tragedy, suggesting the deceased was on the brink of crossing a spiritual boundary. It is a line that can be clipped and looped, tweeted and debated, shared across faith groups and political chat rooms. It is also precisely the sort of claim that prompts immediate pushback, because personal spiritual journeys are private and, in a charged moment, can be weaponized. That pushback came fast and decisive from people who had a different vantage point. Rob McCoy, pastor of Godspeak Calvary Chapel and Charlie's partner in founding Turning Point Faith, issued a short, pointed statement that read like a rebuke and like grief at once. Charlie Kirk was my friend and I was his pastor, McCoy wrote. He reminded listeners that Charlie never publicly spoke poorly of Candace, that he disagreed without gossip, and that now was a time for friends to stand with the bereaved. My only comment I offer regarding Candace is this, he said, I only wish at this tragic time of mourning she would be the friend to Charlie that he was to her. He would never have treated Candace or her family in such a way had God forbid this tragedy been hers. A friend loves at all times. Proverbs 17 verse 17. The statement is short, but its tone is fierce. It is chastisement disguised as pastoral sorrow, and it puts a moral frame around Candace's revelation, suggesting it is not only questionable but uncharitable. The pastor's statement matters for another reason. It offers an anchor against which Charlie's own publicly recorded words can be weighed. There are clips of Charlie speaking about faith, clips where he is careful, doctrinally distinct, and unmistakably evangelical. In one such moment he says, "Our goal should always be to draw people to Jesus Christ, not to Catholicism." The line is small, but it is a hinge. It tells viewers that Charlie thought in terms bigger than denominational labels. It also makes clear that he saw a difference between evangelism to the cross and advocacy for a specific ecclesial system. Listen to the exchange more closely and the doctrinal contours become clearer. Charlie and his interlocutor push against the idea that converting theologically to Catholic dogma is the same thing as being drawn to Jesus. The conversation meanders around Marian doctrines and transubstantiation. At one point, Charlie says plainly that he would never join a religion that claimed someone other than Jesus was without sin. He draws a line there that many evangelicals would recognize, a line that separates a Protestant soteriology from certain traditional Catholic claims about Mary. Later, he self-identifies as evangelical. Those sound bites are powerful when stacked against Candace's claim. They do not prove or disprove what she says happened in private. But they do provide crucial context. Publicly, Charlie articulated reservations about central Catholic dogmas and insisted that the vocation of Christians was to bring people to the cross, not to a sect. So we have two competing narratives, a grieving friend who says she witnessed a quiet, private spiritual shift, and a pastor plus public clips that point to doctrinal distance. Into that fray stepped a third voice, one that tried to diffuse the fight by insisting on unity rather than conversion drama. Bob Kosmakis, a Catholic commentator on X, responded to the claim with skepticism. He argued that most Catholics operating in good faith see no evidence to support the claim that Charlie was converting. Rather, the record shows he held the Catholic Church in respect, praised Catholic judges in the fight over Roe v. Wade, and attended Mass with his Catholic wife. These nuances matter because they suggest a pattern more complicated than either simple conversion or simple rejection. He urged Protestants and Catholics to unite around what mattered most. Charlie was a Christ follower. That is an important third position because it pushes this controversy into a more charitable space. It says, in effect, that theological labeling misses the larger point, that whether or not Charlie intended to become Catholic, he loved his wife, he respected Christians across confessional lines, and his primary identity was a follower of Christ. In a moment of national grief, that is an argument that many want to hear. Despite the reasonable third position, the flames of controversy did not die. The speed and tone of Candace's revelation raised ethical questions about timing. Posting such a claim in the immediate aftermath of an assassination is a risky move. It mixes grief, rumor, and political heat. Even if Candace had private knowledge, and that may be the case, the choice to air it publicly at that particular time looks to many like using tragedy to advance a narrative. That is exactly what Pastor McCoy's statement accused her of. A failure of friendship, a misuse of a private relationship for a public, combustible assertion. Whether that accusation is fair depends on whether Candace's intent was to inform, to memorialize, or to sensationalize. Intent is slippery, however, and in public life motive is usually judged by result. The result here was immediate division. Beyond motives, there is a crucial distinction that religious people understand well. Going to Mass with a spouse, appreciating Catholic traditions, and even praying elements like the Rosary do not necessarily equal conversion. The spiritual lives of public figures are often more porous than the labels we give them. People marry across traditions, learn from other practices, and borrow liturgy without changing ecclesial allegiance. The transcript explicitly notes that Charlie's wife was Catholic and that the family attended Mass together. That is a fact that muddies the water. Attendance at Mass is evidence of relationship with Catholic practice, not proof of sacramental reception or formal conversion. Many Protestants in mixed-faith marriages attend Mass out of respect, familial unity, or spiritual curiosity without intending to be received into the Catholic fold. This is why the question of evidence is so crucial. Candace's testimony, as compelling as it reads in the clip, is a report of private moments. It is possible she was describing conversations where Charlie wrestled, asked questions, and tried on language. It is possible she was describing a process that could have led to conversion months or years from then. It is equally possible she misinterpreted private devotional behavior as a sign of imminent conversion. The public clips of Charlie speaking against key Catholic dogmas are not proof that he could not have changed his mind in private. But they are enough to give listeners pause. At a deeper level, This whole episode raises a larger question about how public figures' spiritual trajectories are treated in the media and by friends. Are we honoring the person, or are we using them to push theological agendas? Charlie spent his life arguing for clarity in public life, for a particular vision of conservatism and public conversation. He also, by many accounts, stood for a unity of sorts when it came to recognizing sincere faith in people who worship differently. The clash between Candace and Pastor McCoy forces the audience to confront whether amplifying private spiritual details after a person's death is an act of truth-telling or of agenda-pushing. It is useful to step back and look at the cultural currents behind some of these statements. There is, as one clip in the transcript notes, a broader movement of young men turning to older, ancient liturgies as a kind of refuge. People are searching for something that lasts, something that is beautiful and ancient and not subject to every cultural breeze. That does not mean everyone who enters a Catholic or Orthodox church does so because they have embraced every papal or doctrinal claim. Sometimes people are drawn by aesthetics, stability, or sacramental rhythm. That explanation helps explain why Charlie, a man who loved tradition and seriousness in public life, could attend Mass and appreciate Catholic judges' roles in public policy without necessarily committing to every theological assertion of Rome. So what should a careful reporter or a conscientious friend do here? First, separate claim from evidence. Candace made a grave, attention-grabbing claim that demands corroboration. Her personal knowledge matters, but it is still a claim. Second, respect both the dead and the mourning. In a moment of national grief, amplification of private spiritual wrestling has consequences for loved ones. Third, avoid the easy polemics. This is not a moment for raw triumphalism on either side. If the goal of faith is to lead people to Jesus, then the memory of a man who identified as a Christ follower deserves a space where his core commitments are not reduced to one headline. It is also worth asking what the political consequences might be. In an era when religious identity and political identity often conflate, the idea that a high-profile conservative might be becoming Catholic is almost certain to be seized by different factions. For some conservatives, it would be heralded as an embrace of a cultural anchor, judges who share Catholic formation, a robust public morality, and an institution that on some social issues aligns with certain political aims. For others, it would be read as a betrayal, an abandonment of the Protestant foundations of much of American conservative thought. That political angle is precisely why the claim was so combustible and why figures like Rob McCoy felt compelled to issue a public rebuke. The spiritual narrative risks being turned into a political cudgel. And yet, if we listen to the more moderate voices, the clearer call is for unity. Bob Kosmacki's plea that Catholics and Protestants focus on common ground, that Charlie was a Christ follower, offers a template for how to move forward. It asks both sides to recognize the complexity of human faith. It asks followers of different traditions to err on the side of charity. That may feel unsatisfying for the partisan mind that prefers a clean label, but it is the kind of posture that honors the dead and protects the bereaved from needless public strife. There is also a deeper pastoral lesson here about friendship and discretion. McCoy's invocation of Proverbs, that a friend loves at all times, is a diagnostic of character as much as an ethical rebuke. Friendship, especially in public life, requires discretion. It requires knowing when private conversation should remain private, and when airing a personal spiritual development will do more harm than good. Candace framed her remark as testimony, as a recollection from closeness. The pastor framed it as a breach of pastoral charity. Both appeals are moral, and both claim high ground. The tension between them is not easily resolved. In the end, what remains indisputable is not the disputed interior life of Charlie Kirk but the broader fact that he inspired fierce loyalty and fierce disagreement. He lived at the intersection of religion, politics, and cultural commentary, and he left no small footprint. Whether he was private in his spiritual wrestling or public in his doctrinal commitments, the narratives that form after his death will say more about those telling them than they do about him. That is a sobering thought for anyone who follows public figures. In death, as in life, we often project onto people our own hopes, fears, and theological agendas. So where does that leave you, the listener or reader? It leaves you with a choice about how to interpret what you hear and how to participate in the conversation. You can treat Candace's words as a whistle blown by a friend who saw something intimate and important and felt the need to share. You can treat them as an opportunistic headline dropped too soon. You can weigh them against the public record. Charlie's clips arguing evangelicals should focus on Jesus, his clear reservations about Marian dogma, and the fact that he attended Mass with his wife. You can listen to the pastor's rebuke and feel the moral weight of friendship. Or you can find common ground in Bob Kosmacki's urging that Protestants and Catholics focus on unity, not seizure. There are practical steps for anyone producing content from this moment. If you are a journalist, verify. Find the original podcast clip, confirm exact wording and context, and ask for corroboration. If you are a content creator, decide whether to clip for engagement or to create a measured, fact-checked response that centers the bereaved. If you are a pastor or a Christian leader, model charity, stress the central claim of the gospel rather than the denominational skirmish. And if you are a viewer, remember that a single sentence can ignite weeks of controversy. It is worth withholding judgment until you see the full evidence. We will likely never know every private conversation Charlie had or how close he may have been to a formal theological decision. That is the tragedy of public life. Interior change is often a private thing, and public pronouncements rarely capture the nuance of private wrestling. What we do know is this: in the crossfire between a friend's testimony and a pastor's rebuke, the most helpful posture for those left behind is mercy. Before we leave this, let us return to what really matters to many people who followed Charlie: his commitment to Christ. Regardless of denominational tags or doctrinal disputes, many who knew him insist that his life was marked by an attempt to place Christ at the center. That legacy, if it is true, is worth protecting from being reduced to a viral line or a partisan talking point. So ask yourself, when a claim like this appears after a death, do you amplify or do you ask for evidence? Do you turn it into content for engagement, or do you create a space of respect for those mourning? The answer will tell you a lot about the kind of public life you want to be part of. Was Candace wrong to make the claim so soon after Charlie's death? That depends on what she knew and why she said it. Was her perspective plausible? Possibly. Was it responsible timing? Many will say it was not. Is there a kernel of truth in what she said that people are unwilling to admit? Perhaps there is, and perhaps the truth is more complex than any single headline can hold. At minimum, this controversy functions as a mirror. It forces a public to reckon with how it treats the spiritual lives of its icons, how it balances zeal with tenderness, and how it honors those who are gone. If you believe, as many do, that Charlie's legacy was about Christ above all, then the clearest tribute you can pay him right now is not to score points or rake up an old fight. It is to remember the person in full, to offer grace to the bereaved, to pursue evidence before amplifying claims, and to lean into the unity that the gospel calls for across confessional lines. Share this video if you think the memory of Charlie should remind us to place Christ before labels. Comment below with your thoughts. Was Candace wrong to go public with this claim so soon, or did she have a duty to report what she knew? Subscribe for continued coverage as this story evolves. For now, keep the conversation honest, keep it kind, and remember that in the middle of controversy, real humans are grieving. That ought to temper our outrage with compassion and our certainty with humility.